Good evening. I'd like to call the February 23rd, 2022 meeting to order. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Here. Here.
Here. Here. Here.
Here.
Here. Mr. Paulson, will you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Board members, are there any modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. In accordance with Board Policy 2.230, members of the public wishing to offer public comment have the opportunity to do so. A public comment sign-up sheet was made available until 7 p.m. at the meeting site. Board meetings are available for viewing via live stream on the district's YouTube channel. As with all comments, please be aware that it's the board's regular practice to not directly discuss, ask questions, or take action on public comment until the time has been taken to gather adequate information. The board is there to listen. Lack of action or direct response following public comments does not imply any lack of interest in what is being shared. Per Board Policy 2.230, the time allotted for each person to speak during public comment may be shortened. We won't need to do that tonight. We'll keep it the full 3 minutes. To preserve confidentiality, the board and its president request that items relating to either personnel or students be provided to the board privately or in writing for consideration in a future closed session if necessary. The board must protect the civility and decorum of the meeting. Please be respectful for the duties of the board, our district leadership team, and the democratic process in your public comment. Please include your name, whether you are a resident of the district. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. We are using a new timing system tonight to provide a better visual reminder for the speaker of the amount of time allocated for public comment. That was some feedback we got back from the community, so it'll be right over here by Mr. Hanlon. It'll be counting down. As the timer counts down to 0, please finish your comments. Please be factual and courteous and do not include statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to members of the board or staff. The first person up is Andrew Yu.
Hello. Hi there. Good evening. My name is Andrew Yu. I am a parent in the district. I have 3 children in school, 2 in Hubble and 1 in Wheaton, Warrenville South. I am also a pulmonary and critical care physician. I've been serving in DuPage County for the last 17 plus years. And first of all, I'd like to say is I am not opposed to having a choice of masking for our children. However, I do want to offer a perspective and ask a question. And that is, what do we do to protect our children? We put helmets on and pads on our hockey and football players. We prepare for even slim disasters, such as, hopefully with no tornadoes and fires, with fire drills and tornadoes. We even, for the unthinkable of an active shooter, we lock doors, we check IDs, and we have active shooter drills. We go through those measures to protect our children and to provide a safe environment for them to learn and grow. And my proposal is I would ask that the board develop a plan. Whenever we teach our kids to drive, we don't wait for them. We don't teach them to wait until they get to the intersection to look for a red, yellow, or green light. A failure plan is a plan for failure. Currently, our park district even has a protocol to stop field and swimming activities during a lightning storm to prevent the even slim chance of even being struck by lightning. This is a published protocol. We all abide by it. And I think we should be able to see an impending infectious storm and should plan to activate mitigation based off publicly available local metrics, such as positivity rates, hospitalization rates, mortality rates, vaccination rates possibly, or even school infection rates. Now, I can see that there haven't been a lot of metrics that have been provided by the Department of Health that we took our guidance. And so I don't think it's necessarily fair that you guys have to make these decisions, but I think that's something we will have to deal with. This would also provide transparency and clarity for all, so we know what to expect and what to look out for. This also will remove the burden from the school board onto our community, so the community can now do mitigations to control those rates and allow our kids to stay in school. I think this is an opportunity to utilize critical thinking skills that we are striving to teach our children. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but if we get to a point if we have 10% rate in our infection rate in our schools, that will force the Department of Health to shut down our schools. And I would rather our kids stay in schools than do remote learning at all costs if we can. So I ask you again, what do we do to protect our children? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is Jennifer Yu.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Yu, and I am a parent of 3 children in the district. I am also a pharmacist. While I am a bit concerned about the lift of the recent mask requirement by the board, despite the recommendations of both the CDC and IDPH, I am even more concerned about the board's seemingly lackadaisical approach to planning for the next variant. And it is out there. According to the NPR, there is a new Omicron variant circulating that is currently accounting for 3.9% of infections in the U.S. Infectious disease experts are watching this variant with a wary eye to see if it crosses the 8% threshold, at which cases may start to rise exponentially once again. And this variant is once again said to spread even more easily. The time to plan is now. We need to have a set plan based on health metrics with increasing and layered mitigations, including the use of universal masking. We cannot rely simply on an increase of air exchanges to keep our schools open with teachers in the classrooms. I know we are all tired of hearing about it, but it isn't going to disappear just because we are ready to return to normal. No more last-minute planning, no more emergency meetings. We need a plan now. Thank you.
Next up is Alicia O'Connell.
Good evening. My name is Alicia O'Connell, and I have 5 children who have either graduated from District 200 or are currently still attending. First, I would like to say that I am greatly encouraged by the pictures shared on District 200 social media pages of children with free, smiling faces. I am also encouraged that our case numbers continue to drop even with a mask optional policy in place. District 200 has had a relatively smooth transition, and I credit this to the board's decision early on to adopt a mask optional policy for all students. While I believe there are positive changes happening, there is one thing I would like to bring to the attention of the board tonight. That is the language of the change in face covering policy 4-812. It reads, "It is recommended that the Board of Education suspend board policy 4-182, face coverings as presented," end quote. I am troubled by the use of the word suspend, as it implies the Board of Education has the legal authority to reinstate the mask policy at any given time. I am asking the board to consider using the word revoke instead. To be clear, at this time, the Board of Education has no legal authority to require the use of a face mask to prevent the spread of an infectious disease without consent or court order. The language is very clear in the Illinois Healthcare Act and has since been upheld by court order. No entity has the legal authority to require the use of a face covering either through consent or court order except the local health department. This authority was granted by the legislature, and it cannot be delegated to school districts through executive order, mandates, or emergency rules. For this reason, it would be prudent for District 200 to revoke Board Policy 4-812 since it is unlawful and in violation of statutory rights. Thank you.
Next up is Sarah C.
Hi.
I had this huge thing written out here. I'm going to kick myself for not just reading from it. I'm a parent of 2 children who are immunocompromised, and I have to say I was in shock on February 6th when the other students and families in the district who walk in my shoes were not considered when the decision was made to remove masks the next day. The amount of anxiety and fear that caused so many families without tiered mitigation, without saying, this is coming, preparing these children and families that this was going to come, to me was just absolutely a disregard for children with disabilities. Other districts waited. They had a plan, but not us. I kept my kids home the next day. I sent a letter to the board. I sent a letter to you, Dr. Schuler. I got a call that we could wear N95 masks as if we weren't already wearing them. We don't matter. We didn't matter the first day I came to speak when I was being booed up here. I just don't understand why. I mean, we're always different. We're always different because our kids are sick. There's people who were planning on having their children come back to school when the numbers went down, and they can't now because we're no longer wearing masks. And unfortunately, my children have caught it twice during outbreaks, during school, when masks have been relaxed. And currently tonight, my mother is in the hospital because of that. So the pandemic is not over. I know 2 people that passed away in January, a 9-month-old baby in the hospital for 5 days with group COVID, a friend in the hospital, and now my mother. You guys, what are we doing? Stop making this political. It's medical. Please consider that there are other people, that this is not just about rights. I mean, if you knew how much my children hated me being up here, but how the pull to help save them is stronger than that. Please take them into consideration.
Thank you. Next up is Shannon Lumjuko.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Shannon Lumjuko. I have 2 children in the district. As you know, I've written to many of you. I'm passionate about public health, and that's why I'm here tonight. I'd like to focus on a term that has come up in the debate around COVID mitigation, and that is focused protection. This argument that high-risk students are able to wear a mask to protect themselves. But what does focused protection really look like for these kids at school? So you've got kids now who can test positive for COVID. They come back to school after 5 days. Supposedly they have to wear a mask, but they've still got to eat lunch. So I'm not sure how that works, and it would be great to hear more about how that works. You've got students in school who are close contacts of family or other individuals who test positive. There's no quarantine now. Official guidance still recommends masks and testing, but we're not doing it. The idea of focused protection for high-risk kids in this scenario is not tenable. Yes, those kids can choose to wear a mask, but do they just not? I guess they don't eat snack in class time, so they can just choose to not do that, but I guess we have them skip lunch too. I mean, they're in the same air as all the rest of the kids. I think we just have to think through how this is actually going to work for these kids in school. Focused protection in the context of high-level community transmission. That's what I'm talking about. So for kids that are high risk, but also kids that have high risk family members at home, kids who have younger siblings that aren't old enough to be vaccinated. So it's a decision that's forcing these families now to choose between sending their kids to school or potentially exposing them to this virus that could be life-altering for them. And this is why our health department is still explicitly recommending masking in schools as long as community transmission is substantial or high. That's their recommendation right now. So if our district either can't or won't implement a protective recommended measure, then you have to ask yourself what message that's sending to our vulnerable children and their vulnerable family members. Do the wants of the healthy outweigh the needs of the medically fragile and the high risk? And is that the normal that we want to pursue? And if we are a district that strives for equitable access to public education for all students, is this how we achieve it? I understand that you're in a difficult position. I'm just having a hard time reconciling that we gave in to bullies at the expense of our vulnerable children and families. And I truly hope to hear a robust discussion tonight around how our district plans to protect these kids and their families. Thank you.
That completes our public comment for the evening. Okay, we have one action item tonight, update to COVID-19 mitigation plan. Dr. Schuler?
Thank you, Mrs. Crabtree. So a little bit of context for the presentation that was attached to the board packet that we're going to go through tonight. As I think has already been shared a couple of times during public comment, the board is well aware that you came together on February the 6th for an emergency meeting. We did that certainly in response to a development in the legal case that did bring school districts together to evaluate how they addressed ultimately a TRO that was issued that certainly impacted District 200 directly. At that meeting on February the 6th, the board did make a decision that they communicated out to the community to, at the time, temporarily suspend your board policy on face coverings and quarantine. February the 9th, at your regular board meeting, we did provide an update to the board on the metrics that we have monitored every month at your board meeting since the beginning of the school year. Many of those we're going to go back through again this evening because they are relevant, I think, in this discussion on what is the plan or the path as we move forward. And at the end of that update or presentation on the 9th, the board did specifically affirm the desire to have a plan brought forward tonight that would look at our path moving forward. I think it's been acknowledged and certainly shared in a lot of our discussions that this is complex. There are a lot of layers to this discussion on the path moving forward. Certainly, we have, as a public school district, both a desire and an obligation to educate students in our community, to provide focused protection for students in our community, and it is my hope, my desire, that you will see that in the plan that we've brought forward tonight. The plan that we're bringing forward tonight was reviewed with one of your community citizens advisory committees for feedback last week. It has been reviewed, shared with the DuPage County Health Department, reviewed, shared with some of our other community partners that have provided us feedback, certainly as we've navigated through the year. And so, again, what we're going to bring to you tonight is a plan that does represent certainly a lot of work on the part of our administrative team in putting this together and recognizing, again, that a lot of what we're sharing is not necessarily new information, but obviously put together in the context of a plan that provides for us some clear signals moving forward on when we need to make adjustments in our mitigation plans. And so hold on. Not working here. Can you help me? that would be helpful. Thank you. All right, here we go. So our objectives for tonight and the information that we're gonna go through. We're gonna start with a little review of our current tiers of COVID mitigations, review the list of the mitigations that are currently in our toolbox, spend a little bit of time looking at some of the shifts in our understanding around COVID and the landscape in response to COVID. Then we're gonna run through 4 different key types of analytical data that I think are going to frame our signals and our response, and then look specifically at what that information is telling us as we look specifically at each of those pieces of information, and then end with a couple of recommendations for the board. So we have 2 different tiers of layered COVID mitigations, and you hear the term a lot of the importance of layered mitigations. And simply put or described, I think we shared this with the board at one point toward the very beginning of the pandemic. If you think about a block of Swiss cheese, right, that has a variety of holes in it, the concept of layered mitigation is being able to layer some of your supports or your mitigations so that you can plug as many of those holes as possible, with those holes potentially representing places where disease can spread inside of a school. And so the 2 different types that we have universal mitigations. Those are those that are applied daily across the district to all of our educational settings. And generally those universal mitigations are ongoing until conditions or data signal that it's time to make a change. We also have specific targeted mitigations. And so in a little bit, we're going to talk about our approach in looking at situations where we have multiple cases within a specific setting within the school district. And when we do that, we go through an investigative process to determine if there is any relationship between those cases within that setting, and that's where we talk about targeted mitigations. So those are mitigations that are applied specifically to that space, certainly applied based on the need within that space. Students or adults within that space generally fall on a continuum for what we would call less intrusive to more intrusive, right, in terms of the mitigation, but are generally put in place for a very finite period of time, right? Short duration until we've been able to assess or determine that the environment is back to normal. So our universal COVID mitigations, and again, we've used the term not visible in the classroom. This does not mean that they don't support or protect our efforts to keep students and adults safe within there, but by not visible, meaning that generally the students in the classroom wouldn't necessarily know or see, right, that those things are taking place. So nightly we do ionize all of our instructional spaces. Toward the beginning of the pandemic, we upgraded filtration to the highest possible MERV 13 filters, and we've continued to change those at regular intervals. We've increased air exchanges in each of our classrooms. Our facilities team, working with Dr. O'Keefe, has studied every space within the district to monitor air exchanges within that space, and we continue to monitor that. And then again, I mentioned the investigation and targeted mitigation protocol. We do have some universal mitigations that I think are a little bit easier to see inside of our space. That includes we continue to exclude or isolate students who are positive of COVID-19 or sick. We do operate with 6-foot distancing at lunch at the elementary and middle school. We do have 6-foot options within the high school, but simply based on the sizes of those spaces and number of students, we are not operating with 6-foot distancing at our high schools. We've operated from the beginning of the year with assigned seats on buses to help us with contact tracing. We do have a COVID-19 surveillance testing program through SHIELD. We do also have a testing option available through Safeguard. That was a company we worked with last year that we've used in specific targeted situations. We use that for test to stay. We've used that as a mitigation option within certain classrooms. Masks are required currently on buses and other district transportation. We do continue to contact trace and notify families when there are in-school close contacts. We've continued to use what I'll continue to call a test to stay option, even though there's not currently a quarantine requirement. When we do have a close contact, we continue to offer that testing as an option to families, and then our principals, especially at the elementary level, EC and elementary, do continue to do classroom notifications when we have a positive case. There are a couple of mitigations that I want to highlight that since the beginning of the pandemic have either been removed or suspended from our universal list. The board might remember that through most of last year, up until April 12th, we were operating with 6-foot distancing in all of our classrooms. That was reduced to 3 feet on April the 12th. And then at the beginning of this calendar year, the length of time for isolation and quarantine at the time was also reduced or shortened. I mentioned the TRO that brought about some changes on February the 6th. Those were implemented on February the 7th. And the mitigations that were suspended at the time as a result of that were the required quarantine for close contacts, required universal masking, and the test to stay requirement. Again, I've mentioned we've continued to offer that as an option, but it is not a requirement. I want to highlight some of the targeted COVID mitigations that, again, you'll see come into play as we start to talk about investigations of multiple cases. So, as a reminder, our targeted mitigations are applied to individual spaces as needed based on the data that we've collected from our classrooms. That includes options such as turning desks in the same direction, increased spacing of desks in classrooms, increasing the use of the ionizer within an instructional space. Again, looking at our HVAC system, if we've studied air exchange and determined that we can or should increase that, we've done that. Looking at levels of humidity within a room, trying to increase that. I mentioned the testing cycle, so we have in a couple of spaces, again, offered that testing cycle to all students in a particular room when we've seen a cluster of cases, and then providing high-quality masks specifically to students or staff that want them. Those are targeted mitigations that we brought in. So I want to shift now and just talk a little bit about some of what we know has changed, right, with as we look at the virus. And we go back to about a year ago in 2021. There were masks. Universal masking was certainly around, but there was not the availability of high-quality masking as there is now. I remember in the early stages of the pandemic, we really scrambled to get any kind of masks, certainly within schools, and there's now significant availability as we made the decision with the board on February the 6th. By the morning of February the 7th, I was able to have 2,000 high-quality masks delivered to our office that morning on February the 7th. Vaccination, again, a year ago, it was available only to a very small set of employees that were generally working in healthcare frontline. It is now widely available to those 5 and up. There were not a year ago any direct therapeutics. There are therapeutics available now. I do want to mention with that, those are not necessarily always widely available to individuals, but there are therapeutics that have been developed and approved. And again, just important to note that we're dealing with a different variant, right, of the virus. And I think, as mentioned tonight, the current variant that we're dealing with has different characteristics from the original version of the virus, and as we continue to move forward, that is likely to continue to be the case. We do continue to partner with the DuPage County Health Department. was mentioned in a public comment tonight, and I want to acknowledge we shared with CAC that the DuPage County Health Department does continue to align with CDC and the fact that they do recommend universal masking for schools. I have, though, worked considerably with a group of superintendents in the health department looking at this idea or this thought of the road forward. And one of the things that they have recently shared with school districts is as we move forward on this path, it is important, or there's recognition that we need to look at this notion not only of layered mitigation, but a multitude of indicators that help us to make those decisions moving forward. I think even the health department in our conversations has recognized that a model that is built solely on a single metric of case count may not accurately describe kind of the reality of the situation. And so the health department recently identified some of the other metrics that they believe are important for school districts to look at. That includes level of COVID cases specifically in our school environment with our students and staff, vaccination coverage within our community or our area, specifically the strain that the virus is placing on the healthcare system, in other words, hospital utilization, the ability to use testing programs with students, and then specific outbreak activity or increasing trends within the school or surrounding community of outbreak activity. We have continued to share, and I think there was some questions certainly raised tonight on the ability of the school district to continue to provide focused protection for vulnerable populations. I do want to call the board's attention to an attachment that actually is in your green folder that's called Guidance for Accommodations that was developed on 2/24. So being able to capture the specific support that individual schools and teams are able to provide for students within the district's not easy to do on a series of bulleted slides. And so the memo that you have, or not a memo, the sheet that you have in front of you actually is a sheet that Erica Ekstrom, who's our Executive Director of Special Education, put together. From the beginning of the pandemic, she has continued to provide the support in terms of specific accommodations that have been provided, and Erica put together for each of our buildings a very detailed look at how it is that teams should approach coming together to look at individual supports that may be needed for students. And so what you see in this sheet is both the procedures that are followed by an individual building as they're looking at perhaps additional supports that may be needed for a student, but then on the backside specifically some of those accommodations that can be provided, right? Again, whether it be, again, access to masking, access to increased distancing within the classroom, specific seating within a classroom. There are a variety of options that we can consider, but I think important always that they be considered for the individual student and for the individual student's circumstance. So I wanted to provide this for the board because that first bullet you see on this slide that talks about building teams continuing to evaluate individual needs and accommodations seems like a simple bullet, but there's a lot to that work that our individual teams are doing. Already mentioned that we do know that we have high-quality masks available. We've made those available certainly to staff, and Mrs. Ekstrom has told all of our buildings they are available to any student that needs one as well. And we've continued to share information on vaccination and booster opportunities within our community. So, as I kind of sum this section up and then talk forward, right? What we know is that as circumstances and as our data changed, we do have to continue to kind of look forward, right, at how do we move forward from this. And a few of those future considerations, right? We believe that data-based decisions about adjusting mitigations, prioritizing when appropriate, those most impactful to the student's experience should guide our practice. I've mentioned already that I don't think that a purely case-based model, either case-based just within our school or community, is able to fully reflect the complexity, right, of how we respond to the current situation. We need to look at, use multiple measures. I think it's important that we recognize that with the shifts in information that are available to us, I think the board has seen several communications from community members asking for a specific plan with specific thresholds. I understand that, but in the context of how information has changed and what we've learned, I don't think that accurately captures the reality of what the virus may look like 3 months from now. And so I think it's important that we be very clear on the metric, not the metrics, very clear on the variables that we're looking at and the data that we're looking at, and very clear on what those signals are telling us, but continue to have some flexibility in terms of how we respond to those things moving forward. I think it's critically important that we continue to focus on the social emotional wellness and needs of our students, as well as the academic experience that they have inside of our school. And then I think it's important that we continue to recognize that there are opportunities that remain widely available for students and staff or adults to protect themselves. So, going to run through just 4 different types of analytical data and then specifically identify what those metrics are. And then again, I mentioned I'm going to take you through what each of those pieces of data tell us right now. So the 4 types of data that we're going to run through. Right? First is a couple of different pieces of descriptive data, right, that help us to understand what is it that's happening right now, right, within our school environment. We're going to shift then into talking about some diagnostic data that helps us to understand how that happened. Then move into a couple of pieces of predictive and prescriptive data that help us to look forward and perhaps predict what could happen in the future. I think important to recognize that really any tool that's used to help guide school districts in their planning moving forward, whether that be the MIT tool that we've used throughout the year, whether that be a framework developed by a health department, right? They are all theoretical models, right? They are all taking information and attempting to try to build a theory about what will happen, right, at certain points. And so when we get into the predictive and prescriptive pieces, that is very much kind of living in that space of theoretical models. So the descriptive data, what do we collect currently and what are we going to share with you tonight? What helps us to know what's happening in our schools is our specific District 200 case data by district level and school. So I shared with the board that we keep within our office an active line list dashboard that helps us to understand at any given point in time exactly what's going on with the virus inside of our schools. Positive cases, students that are out of school but getting tested, students who are quarantined, by level, by school, right, we have that data real time. So as soon as one of our nurses enters something into the line list based on a communication with a family, that's immediately updated so that, if need be, we can react and respond to it. Certainly we monitor, we've reported cases per 100,000 within our zip code area within the district. That's the site that was offered by Northwestern Medicine. It's been used widely. We've reported every month at board meetings our approximate student vaccination rates. We're able to query that information out of the iCare system and then run some statistical analysis with that. So as we've reported each month, right, there's an element of that that's approximated a little bit, but it is approximated based on actual numbers of data that we're able to query out of that iCare system that looks by zip code and age of kids. And then we do monitor our hospitalization, ICU, non-ICU data that, again, is queried out of that Northwestern Medicine site. As we move into the diagnostic data, right, this is what helps us to describe how it happens, right? I mentioned within the line list, we know instantaneously when we have a situation where we have multiple cases inside of a particular space. That allows us quickly, right, within a matter of half an hour, to deploy an individual or a team to go look specifically at that space, to understand the case activity, where those cases are coming from, if we know the origin of the case, but then look very specifically at that individual instructional space. It is really the ability to do that investigative or that kind of common space investigative finding that's critically important in us, again, understanding when we have case activity, where is that coming from. When we were in the early stages of this calendar year with the surge in Omicron, as we were responding to 400 plus student cases within a week, it was very difficult to do the common space investigation. There were just simply too many to be able to carry that out at a very detailed level. As you start to see the case activity that we're responding to now, we are able to very clearly continue to address those common space investigations. Predictive data, just want to highlight, we've looked at really two things. One, again, what are we learning about the variant itself, the virus itself? That's information that we're often able to gather from the DuPage County Health Department and some of the individuals that we partner with, as well as just research and what's being shared. Indoor humidity is also something that we've continued to look at. It factors into the MIT tool, right? Is something that's important in helping us to understand what's happening with aerosols when they're inside of a space. And then finally, prescriptive data. So I mentioned the MIT tool. We're going to show you the output on that. That is a tool that brings multiple variables together and gives you an output in a theoretical model that looks at classroom safe hours. So if the virus is inside of a space, how long are a group of students going to be able to be within that space, right, without significant risk of transmission of the virus. And then again, I mentioned the targeted mitigation. So as we go through, I want to now take you back to what those pieces of data are telling us. Again, just as a reminder, we reported this information 2 weeks ago. In the presentation that was uploaded with the board packet on Friday, we had the data as of Friday. Where appropriate, I've given you an update to that data point as of today. So as of Friday, our weekly case count at the end of last week was 32. If you look at that trajectory really over the I think, 5-6 preceding weeks, you do obviously see a sharp decline in student case activity where you're looking at the week of 2-6. That was the first week where masks were recommended, not required, and so you can see the case activity that we've seen over the last 2 weeks under our current set of mitigations. As of noon today, our case activity for this week was at 16. Again, as you study that as kind of a week-over-week trend, that would trend to be down even a little bit more over the 32 from the week before. And again, just a reminder what that represents. 16 positive cases thus far within this week represents about 0.14% of our student population. Staff cases, again, end of last week, we had 4 staff cases through all of last week. We were at 3 as of noon today. So staff cases trended up, have continued to trend back down. This is just another way of really seeing the same information, but broken out by school. So it's a pretty small chart, not super easy to see, but again, this gives you the same 32 cases at the end of last week, just broken out by school. We are continuing to report quarantine students. Just as a reminder, we are not requiring quarantine, but it is still provided once we contact trace as an option. I think as of today, we had 3 students that by choice were quarantining across the district. Cases per 100,000, again, you see what has been a trend down in that area. As of last Friday, cases per 100,000 were at 186. As of the end of the day yesterday, with that daily report, that number was down to 104, and it kind of leveled around that number for today. So again, what you can see in that chart has been a pretty steady decline as we've come down off of that Omicron surge. No change really in this information from when we presented it to you on Friday, actually, with this. So again, our percentage of partially vaccinated students at the elementary level, we approximated 64%, with 57% being fully vaccinated. Middle school, 77% partially vaccinated, 70% fully vaccinated. And then high school bars get a little bit smaller because that opportunity has been available for a little longer. We're at 84% partially vaccinated at the high school level, 77% fully vaccinated. Hospitalization, ICU, bed utilization. Again, you can kind of see in the chart what has been a slow decline down. There was definitely a period of time in the midst of this surge where hospital ICU availability or utilization went up over 80%, meaning less than 20% of those beds were available. It has come down, I think, as of the update at the end of the day yesterday, that utilization was down to 71% from the Northwestern site. And then the MIT outputs, again, much of the information that's already been presented to you factors into that MIT site. It does also look at factors such as how big are spaces, how many students are inside of a space, again, what percentage of those students are either vaccinated or have natural immunity, what percentage of students are in fact masking inside of a space. And again, just a reminder for the board, as we ran this last year, kind of in the background through all of our in-person learning programs, the reason we settled on that 18-hour threshold was that was the lowest point that we got to at any point last year. And so, again, as we continue to run that, even with masks recommended, not required, over the last 2 weeks, you continue to see that we are above that 18-hour threshold. So if I kind of summarize the data points that we've shared with you, right, we recognize that there have been changes to the COVID-19 landscape, and as we've continued to evaluate these data points and where we're at moving forward, we believe that that allows us to continue to make adjustments to both our universal and our targeted mitigations. And so our recommendation for the board tonight, based on the data that we've laid out and shared with you, is that there were 3 mitigations that were suspended on February the 7th. We are recommending tonight that they be removed from your list of universal mitigations. Specifically, the one mitigation of universal masking is a policy, so there is an action item that specifically speaks to removing that policy. And I want to be clear, certainly the board can adjust the wording of the recommendation if you want to. My recommendation to you is that that policy be pulled out of your manual. And that would mean moving forward that if you were to at any point reinstate that required mitigation, it would take action of the board to come back in and reinstate that. So whatever word that you want to consider in the recommendation, should you choose to, we can look at, but I just want to be clear what the intent of that recommendation is. We would recommend that, again, the require quarantine for close contacts be removed from your list, and again, the test to stay requirement. We will continue to offer the testing cycle as both a targeted mitigation and as an option for families, but would not be requiring tests to stay as a condition to not quarantine. We do believe that it's important that the data points that we monitored for you here tonight that certainly showed signals that we are in a much improved situation. We need to continue to monitor those data points. And as a board and as an administrative team, as we see or if we see signals that things are shifting, right, we need to be aware of those signals, right, and be prepared to adjust as appropriate mitigations. I believe moving forward, certainly in the immediate, that is best to be handled on a very targeted basis within our spaces. But I believe that it's important that both the board and administrative team continue to monitor these data points. We ask that you continue to empower us to address those targeted mitigations within spaces as appropriate. And again, I think you saw the range of options that we've used, and we think it's important that we do obviously continue to monitor any updates to joint guidance that's issued as perhaps we make adjustments moving forward. There are some other universal mitigations I think that we've identified when we look at spacing and lunch and a few other areas that I think are important for us to look at. We're not asking that any of those mitigations be officially removed tonight, but we do believe as we move forward and monitor these signals that there is a point, right, as we look perhaps at your next board meeting where it may be appropriate to continue to look at the unlayering of some of those mitigation opportunities. But for tonight, our recommendation is that you focus on those that have been temporarily suspended and move those to being removed from the list. So I will stop there and answer questions or hear comments from the board.
Who'd like to start? Anybody? Like to start?
Sure, I'll go.
Okay.
Not as organized as I usually am, but so I'm just going to walk through the list. So in terms of the busing situation, have we heard any reported issues with masking on buses? Now, that is a federal requirement. That's not related to the state issues. Have we heard any problems with that?
No, I haven't specifically heard of problems. Right, again, we'll just say, you know, unlike perhaps a classroom situation, it's very difficult for a bus driver to monitor exactly what's going on behind them as they're driving the bus. I want their attention on the road that's in front of them, but I have not specifically heard of any problems with that.
In terms of the removal of the required quarantine for close contacts, I understand that. My understanding of reading the appellate court's decision last week is that we do have local control. Is that something where we could make a decision or would consider making a decision that there's a close contact, we would require students to wear a mask for 5-10 days? Is that something that we discussed as an administration? And I think we heard that, or I read that in some of the emails today, that, you know, if somebody's a close contact, they can't be quarantined, so they can still come to school. And if they're choosing not to wear a mask, then that's a potential issue.
Yeah, so I guess there's a little bit of a nuanced response to that in saying that, yes, well, I think the decision of the appellate court did indicate some language that allowed for local control. That's going to be local control that's still going to have to comply with the law and with whatever the codes are, right, that apply to how you handle that. And so that does not take away, I think, any of the issues that were identified in the initial, right, TRO that would still indicate that if there were certain mitigations you were inclined to use, we would still have very specific due process obligations, right, that would be provided. So I guess I just answer that by saying I don't believe for you right now that masking is just something you can simply turn on, turn off, right, even within the local control. We do have some situations where it is required as a condition for coming back from isolation. Early, it is still required inside of that space, but we are not currently requiring a student who is a close contact to wear a mask.
So it's a pretty, I mean, from my opinion, it's a pretty reasonable concern of parents. If they're sending their kids to school and they know there's other close contacts in their classroom, it seems to me like our hands are totally tied. We have no ability to implement a strategy in that situation. We leave it up to the individual student or parents about whether they want to put a mask on, even though they've been, they've been determined to be a close contact. It's totally up to them. I mean,
I hear your question. I'm telling you, I don't have a super easy answer for you. I do believe that there are some very specific requirements that would sit around a situation where you chose through local control to require a mask. I think that'd be very difficult right now.
Can I just add to that? I think that if we were to require that, it would have to come from the health department. Like, I think they would have to issue the court order to require the masking because it is a form of modified quarantine.
yeah.
So I don't think we.
I understand that. I'm just, in reading these email stories today, I'm reading that as a pretty reasonable concern of parents. I understand that all these things we've talked about, they're basically tying our hands. And it's up to the individual student or family what they want to do, because we don't have the control over it.
Or it could be up to the health department, I think.
Well, yeah,
to-
if we know how that's going to go.
But can we, if it is say a classroom has 5 cases, we can ask the health department to help us through that, right?
We could discuss a specific situation with the health department. Again, I want to be really clear that, again, we do, right? In targeted space investigations, if there is a specific consideration, right, that we need to be aware of. But I think a decision for what you would look at would also be tied into what you see inside of that space, right? What does spacing look like within the classroom? What are other layers of mitigation that sit on top of that, right? And again, there are some mitigations that are fully within our control to implement right now based on, I think, where we sit in terms of legal understanding. Masking is one that we would need to work closely with the health department to require.
But
at
we
the time
can
being.
recommend it, correct? In Chris's scenario, if we can notify that classroom and say, there's been an outbreak in this classroom, we highly recommend everybody wear a mask for the next 10 days or 14, whatever it is. But you're just saying we can't require it.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
Well, we already have that in place, right? We already notify. And then secondly, we still, in our language, we still recommend, even though it's optional, I believe, right?
We have in the previous communications.
Yeah. I'm trying to make sure we're not adding new things.
Sure.
We are exercising existing protocols and in the context of respecting the decisions that came down and operating within the law based on those decisions, right? Yeah.
Another question I had, and we've heard a lot about, I guess it's this slide 11, focus protection for vulnerable populations, and we have 6.150, the home and hospital instruction plan. Certainly understand based on our procedures if we're trying to attack those on a case-by-case basis. How do we, I mean, is there a way to report to the board in some fashion how that's going? I mean, we just hear the issues, we hear that we have a plan, but we don't understand how the plan is benefiting kids to enable them to get the instruction, learning opportunity they need at home, or what we're able to do inside the classroom to make it safe for them.
Sure. Yeah, so but what specifically are you looking for in terms of a report?
I didn't have anything specific in mind. I was looking for something, maybe not now, but something to make us as a board, or at least me as a board member, feel comfortable that those students that have those issues are dated, that the issues being addressed.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we reported to you earlier in the year the number of students that we were supporting directly through home hospital instruction, and we can certainly continue to, to update it. I guess well, I certainly respect the need and the feedback. I want to be a little careful in how we report that data because you're dealing with, pretty small numbers, and I do not in any way want to identify an individual student through how we're reporting information.
Totally understand that. I guess it would just be more comforting to me to know that, okay, so we're hearing about these situations.
Sure.
They're real. They're real, and we're sympathetic to those. And we have a plan.
Sure.
So it seems to me, what's the result of that plan?
Yeah.
Are there 35 kids who have to, not able to come to school? They're learning through the policy 6.150. How's that going? Is there a path to get them back to school? Are they done in school for the rest of this year? What's the result of this?
Sure.
Not now, but
Understand.
My only feedback on that is every student is different, every situation is different. It's hard to, how do you try to have a metric around that, right? In a report, that's what I'm not sure we have to give Jeff specific guidance on that, I think. If I'm trying to solve the problem, maybe I shouldn't, but.
I think for me, it would be a comparative of, in pre-pandemic years, how many kids did we have in that situation? Because unfortunately, we have kids going through chemotherapy, we have kids with severe issues, and that we've had to address that in a different time, in a different place. And so comparatively, pre-pandemic to now, are we in range with that? Are we way out, in a pre-pandemic year, did we have 10 kids and now we have 40 kids specifically because of COVID? That's how I would want to look at it, I think.
I'm not sure what that would tell us, though. So
I think that tells us if our schools are providing a safe environment in the context of a global health pandemic.
Well, you're assuming negative. You're assuming we don't. And so I'm
No, I'm
trying
not
to
assuming
figure.
we don't, but
Just the number of students in that plan, whatever we want to call that plan, I'm not sure what that signals to us and how that would change our direction or guidance. I don't know. We could talk about it. I'm just not sure what that would do for us, right? It doesn't say we care more or less. It doesn't say we're servicing them more or less. It just tells us how many parents have chosen to take that path. And I guess that's important. I'm just not sure how would we act on that? What would it signal? That's what I think we should think through, right, a little bit.
well, yeah, I mean, I think for me, it would signal, is there something else we can do? And I would like to know how many parents are opting for that. And, according to this protocol that, it goes through a medical, not evaluation, but goes through a medical team, goes through the IEP, the 504 team, which I think is great. And so we know there is, I guess to me, that tells me pre-pandemic and now, like how is COVID-19 further impacting these students and the education?
I believe we've
received?
reported that data to you before, and we can certainly provide an update for you.
Just to
Can
ask.
I have one more question, but if you're going to
It
continue
was
on that, that's
commenting on
fine.
Susan, because I agree that I do think that would, kind of show where we're at. And I'm struggling to remember where I heard this, but I feel like our numbers are really low, the number of students who are doing home service, because we are working very closely with those families who have concerns to bring them back into school. But I want to say I was really surprised at how low the number is, so I don't.
Yeah, and I don't want to quote the wrong number. That's why I can appreciate the question and where it is, unless let's see if you remember prior to at least early part of the year, how many students were we supporting?
I believe it was approximately 30 students.
At the beginning of the school year? Got it. Okay.
Correct. We have had a number of students return.
So, sorry, Brad, I know you want to go to your question. I just want to talk about this for a second. So whatever the number is, I don't think the solid number tells us much, right? What I care about is the parents that choose that plan, that approach, that process, that we are addressing their needs, we are addressing the needs of the students, if it's 1 or 30, whatever, and that it's effective, right? So I think that's what I want to know about. I don't care about the number necessarily. I care about students that need it, the families that need it can get it, right? Sure. And we're seeing that in the email communication, which is fantastic. And so, I don't know how we report on it, but that's my concern, that the process is working, people are able to, voice their concerns, we're able to address them, there's communication, there's engagement, and there's a plan that works for that student and that family. So I don't know how we report on that, but that's my intent.
Yeah, I think that fairly gets to what I'm thinking, but maybe not able to communicate. And then I guess my last point is, we've read some emails from parents about teachers locating students in different locations, opening windows, and I'm looking at this list for the targeted mitigations on page 7. I think we need to support our teachers for making decisions that are important for them and their health. We have to remember that it's not just the students in the classroom, it's the teachers. Teachers have their own, concerns. Some have medical conditions, some have serious medical conditions. I think we need to support the teachers to make the best decision they can in their classrooms to continue learning, to provide the flexibility, and to protect themselves and their families as well. So let's not take that out of the conversation.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to mention, so the same accommodation process that we're talking about for students, we do have staff members that are receiving appropriate accommodations as well. So again, from the beginning of the pandemic, we've done that to support individual teachers, but I think it's important that, again, much like we do on the student side, that there's a structure to that. So I do want to make sure we're supporting teachers, but that we're creating the parameters with the right team that's coming together to do that versus simply having teachers do that on their own.
Right. Okay. Now that's,
Dr. Schuler, I did refer to my notes. We had 17 students at the beginning of the school year.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't think I have any other questions or comments at this point. Other than I'm glad we're looking at indoor humidity. I think that's an important consideration. About airborne viruses, there's a certain band of humidity percentage, which is a target zone. That's important for this situation. So I'm glad to see that as a predictive data point.
Next, Dave?
Back on the accommodations, is there a level in between? I mean, the policy Brad cited is when somebody's getting home instruction. Is there, if I understand this, or maybe I've misunderstood it, is there something in between, accommodations that are?
This sheet that you have in front of you, Dave, is not specifically for students who are receiving homebound support. That's supporting students who are in our building and looking at their environment inside the classroom.
And so, which kind of, so a lot of concern about that from a lot of people in the community. Has there been an increase in those kinds of requests since since the TRO was lifted?
No, I mean, we definitely had to do some problem solving with individual families, which did happen both at the building level, and I should mention in when we're looking at a healthcare and accommodation plan, that's a collaboration between building principal and our school service center staff. So we did have to do some problem solving, but I think we've largely worked through that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo what Rob emphasized, making sure that people are getting their concerns addressed. On the recommendations, this last one that says future updates to joint guidance be reviewed and implemented as appropriate. What does that mean?
That just means that
What's
again,
joint guidance, I guess?
So Illinois State Board of Education issued a very, very detailed guidance document at the beginning of this year, right?
Okay.
It dealt with a whole lot of things beyond just masking and quarantine, right? to school districts. I anticipate that that information will continue to get updated. And when it does, I think we've got to look at how that impacts our programs as well.
Okay, so it's really guidance from
Right.
government agencies, whichever
We-
ones
we
they are.
have guidance from the Illinois State Board of Education. Of course, there's quite a bit of information from the CDC on guidance to schools.
Yep.
So there are a lot of.
And the health department, state and
of kind of stated guidance documents that are out there.
This ionization, are these machines, are these handheld machines? So there's not one for every classroom,
There's not one for every classroom.
so many
Each-
per
each
building, and
building
they
has
walk
them.
through the building, and if there's a need during the day, they can.
Yes.
And what is that? Is that a?
It helps to disinfect, kind of clears
Okay.
out the
Is it a
environment.
spray or is it?
Spray.
Yeah, okay. And the test to stay, since the TRO was in place, since we made the decision on February 6th, are people still choosing, now that we have test to stay as an option instead of a requirement, are people choosing that option?
We've had a few families, right? But not everyone is. But we do have some people taking advantage of it. Even currently, in almost daily, we're still operating that system and making runs to the lab. But it is optional, but we do have people taking advantage of it.
Thank you.
I wanted to follow up on Brad's comment about teaching and staff, and I'm glad to hear that there's a structure in place for staff that may need accommodations. Are students made aware of that a certain staff member may need to have that accommodation, or is it?
Probably depends on the situation. I mean, again, I guess recognize even on the staff side, we're dealing with health information of the staff, and so it sometimes depends on the individual circumstance, what the staff member's comfort level is in sharing information. So I think oftentimes yes, but really largely driven by kind of what the staff member and what the accommodations are that may be being put in place.
Okay, because we have, as Brad alluded, we have had those emails where certain students have felt put off. I'm not sure of the right word. And if it was, an accommodation or a structure that was put in place purposely, I would hope
Sure.
that would be communicated, but I don't know how you maybe could do that if it's personal health information. Having said that, one thing that has weighed on me heavily for 2 years, and I just want to share it. I know that a lot of our staff is still choosing to wear a mask, and that's fine because it should, it is a choice. I hope that there will come a point where there's comfort that they will start removing their masks, and with the thought that there are many students in our district that we don't know go home and don't see an adult smile at them. And at school is sometimes the only time that they will see, a teacher catch their eye and kind of smile and build them up. And I worry about those kids who aren't getting that affirmation from an adult. So I would just encourage, when the comfort is there, that catch those eyes. And
Your intent, I get your intent, but what I want to ensure is that someone's choice is their choice.
Absolutely.
Right? And we're not encouraging them to change their choice. And I think that's dangerous.
Correct, and that nobody
Okay.
is encouraging them to change their choice, because
Okay.
I have heard that there's been peer pressure the other way.
I'm just saying an individual's choice is their choice.
Absolutely.
And I
You're
want to
right.
make sure that they feel comfortable and safe with their choice, period.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay.
Mrs. Booten?
So this has been a fluid situation from the start. We can't plant our flag in the ground and say, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to stay here. We're in a global health pandemic where scientific information and knowledge are changing and increasing over time. And as we teach in our schools, we have to process this new information and as it's available and be able to move and change with it. Some community members have wanted to hear more from us as individual board members. And I can tell you, and the board members who've been with me for 2.5 years will tell you that if you ask that of me, we will be here all night. I think you all know I am not at a loss of words and thoughts on all of these issues. But the thing is that we were elected to do the work. And I'm here to give you the outcome of my work and not the play-by-play of how I got there. And I can assure you that I've done the countless hours of research, and as I always have. We've had a face covering recommended policy for, or plan for 2 weeks, and our case numbers are declining. What we have in place is working so far in our environment. And I'm fully aware that our health organizations and associations like the American Academy of Pediatrics have yet to change their guidance away from universal masking. And that's a piece of information that I don't take lightly. So I know several news outlets are reporting that the CDC will be updating guidance very soon, and I hope to see that in the coming days here. I know we're all tired of the virus, but we also need to stay aware that the virus isn't tired of us. But as we've shown tonight and as we've done all along, we will change course as we need to, and we will adjust and keep our students and staff as safe as possible as the circumstances change, and I'm confident in that. We still have the test to stay, the high quality face coverings are available, which I'm really glad to hear that we got those quickly. And as we just discussed, we'll continue to help our families with certain and specific medical circumstances to help create a safe learning environment. In addition, all the experts agree that vaccines are our way out of this pandemic. My hope is that people will consult with their doctors and pediatricians to discuss safety if you're hesitant about receiving a vaccine for you and or your child, but then also to discuss efficacy if you have received the vaccine, to understand how the vaccine protects you and your child in a mask-optional environment. And if our district can help with a vaccine education campaign, I would like to see us do that. Another point I want to make is that we as a community need to take a breath and take a long, hard look at how we have been behaving and how we're treating each other. Our children are watching. Their pain, their grief, their anxiety, it doesn't stem from a face covering. It's not a 3 by 6 inch piece of material. It stems from crushing comparison culture on social media, unrelenting pressure that only winning counts, a world they see ahead of them that includes highly worrisome issues like climate change, income and healthcare inequality, human rights violations, and political unrest. I have stood at that podium in a very different time with a very different topic and explained the idea of keeping our eye on the ball. The COVID-19 virus has dominated our lives for almost 24 months and impacted 3 school years. We are exhausted. No matter where you stand, you are exhausted. And I hear you, I see you, I am you. But I beg everyone to steer away from the shiny object that is the face covering and refocus on the real ball, which is our children, the real causes of their mental health crisis, and their future. I want to say thank you to Dr. Schuler and the senior leadership team for their work on this plan and for all the work over the past 2 years. No plan is perfect. It was never easy, and I wish I could say it was over. But with every twist and turn, you all have risen to the occasion, and I'm grateful for that. And to piggyback on Brad's point, I want to offer a very heartfelt thank you to our teachers who have shown strength and grace. And I would ask that our community continue to extend that grace and respect to our teachers. We've thrown them curveball after curveball as we've gone through this pandemic, and these are people just like you and me with families and their own struggles. And they show up every day in our classrooms to teach and care for our students. We're at a point of moving forward, and I hope we can do that with respect and kindness and care. And I just really appreciate all the work. This is a lot, and I know since we had that emergency meeting, I mean, every day I'm just reading and reading and reading and reading and reading and trying to figure out what to do and what's changing, what's best for our community, looking at all the data, looking at all the numbers, and I've always, as any decision I've made in a school board meeting, it's, can I base it in fact? can I sleep at night with that decision? And I'm not going to lie, it's gotten harder to sleep at night with some of these things because this is a moving situation. But I do feel like our data is showing that this is the way to move, that we're ready for this type of thing, that we'll continue to move as things move if we need to. But overall, I'm comfortable with this plan, so thank you.
I just have one comment, Susan, that, again, one person, one point of view, I'm talking about myself now, right? I don't support a vaccine education campaign for the district. I know, I get you do, I don't. I'll just leave it at that. And if we want to advance that conversation, we can have it, but I'm strongly against that as, you know, as a role for the school district. That's my point of view on that. And I think that's what you were assuming, right, or saying?
I was just saying, if the health department asked us to help provide information about the vaccines, public schools have done that in the past with other vaccines and things like that, but that's all I'm saying. I'm
Yeah.
not saying we should develop our own
Got
thing,
it,
but if
got
we
it.
can help disseminate information from our health departments or something like that,
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, I wouldn't have an issue with that.
Right, I understand. I was just reacting to the specific words about vaccine education campaign, that's all. So that was my reaction. Were you done? Did I cut you off?
I am
You
done.
good?
No.
Okay. One of my beliefs is that we will continue to see variants and more things occur. And we need to be agile in addressing those, which I think this plan lays out. It lays out the signals, it lays out the process, and I really like that feature of it. What I'm not certain about, and I don't think we've talked about it, is if there's a need to pivot, we remove if we take one of these, take the policies out and need to pivot back, it's an action of the board. And it has to be within the context of the law, as I said earlier. But I'm not sure what that process looks like. Do we engage the health department? How does, can you shine a light on kind of how that might work, or what you believe how that would work if we have to do that?
Yeah, so the only one of the universal mitigations that actually is an action of the board right now is your face covering policy.
Okay.
Everything else has been a part of our reopening plan and effort that the board has not ever officially taken a vote on every aspect of that. You've
Yeah,
empowered
right.
us to put in place. So the one action even tonight speaks directly to the one item that is actually a part of board policy that we're recommending be removed from board policy. I think to your question on how we get there, yes, I think, of course, we continue to work closely not only with the DuPage County Health Department, but the other entities that provide us feedback and guidance to understand how other aspects of either our targeted mitigation or universal mitigation plan might make sense or, not make sense. Again, I think what you have seen in the DuPage County Health Department is what they've said is, as you're going to strip universal mitigations back, there are two that we've pulled back, right? As you've done that, do that, monitor your case data and what's happening, and give it a window of time before you perhaps strip back another one, right? Like spacing or any of them that, you might be inclined to. So we would continue to collaborate, with really any of the entities that have helped to provide, feedback and guidance. I guess, what I would say, and I think, Susan captured this, right? The reality is there have been a lot of different, sources of input throughout, right? A lot of different entities that have provided thoughts, guidance, support, sometimes aligned, sometimes conflicting, very candidly. And so it's always been our responsibility to kind of take all that information in, put it in the context of what I've just shared with the board tonight, and then ultimately make a local decision on what do we do moving forward, that of course is rooted in, kind of any of the, the guidance that we have from other entities. But again, if I come back and answer specifically, I think face coverings, right, that is board policy, right? So I think that is clearly a decision that sits at the board level. I think any of the other mitigations that we put in place, especially on a targeted basis, or that would really be ours to make as we saw variables that suggested it would be necessary. Does that answer your question or no?
No, because I don't think I asked my question the right way,
Okay.
frankly. I think I'm reacting to language. I'm not an attorney, right? But language in how I read the TRO.
Sure.
Right? About the words due process.
Sure.
I don't quite know what that means in the context of the changing of our face covering policy. I can't connect those two. Maybe I shouldn't be trying to connect the two, but it seems to me there's a connection there.
Yeah. So due process, like, not necessarily just tied to this notion of a face covering. Due process in general means you're taking something away from somebody. The individual has a right to kind of have a role in that process, right? In other words, like, state their case or information if they don't ultimately agree with that decision. So language in the TRO recognized the face covering as a form of modified quarantine. There's specific language in the healthcare code that indicates if an individual is being forced to quarantine, only the health department can do that, and they can only do that after they've followed a certain due process obligation. It would fall into that same bucket, meaning if you were to do it, if a local school district were to do it, they would have to ensure that there's a process in place that would adhere to that due process requirement and what's in the healthcare code.
And then that is that a DuPage County?
No, that's the Illinois Department of Public Health and their healthcare code.
Got it. I'm getting what Brad was saying is, early on, is what does that process look like, and what is our role in that process? That was helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Did you have anything? No. Dave, Susan, you guys all done? Mary? Anything? Brad, anything? Angela, anything else?
I just want to try to make sure I understand the recommendation. It's kind of what Rob was talking about, and it's kind of what your question was. So our recommendation is to suspend the policy, right? But you've used the word remove a couple times. So what is the difference between suspend and remove?
Let me explain it to you, and then you decide as a board what language you want to use. I am recommending that policy be removed from your manual.
Okay. And so that if we, for whatever reason, had to bring it back, if we could, maybe we can't, we would have to go through the posting for 30 days and then approve at a board meeting.
You would have to follow your process for board policy. Now, your policy stipulates certain circumstances where you can avoid that 30-day posting window.
Okay.
You did when you implemented this policy in July of 2020.
Right, but if we the recommendation according to this is to suspend it, what does that mean? To bring it back wouldn't require any action of the board?
I am suggesting to you my recommendation is that you remove it from the manual so that it would take action of the board to bring it back.
Okay.
That was my intent in that recommendation.
And the only way that we could pivot back to that would be if the health department requires it?
No, not necessarily, Brad. And I guess I think there's a lot of layers to that, right?
I'm so confused.
Yeah. How can I help you to bring clarity?
Well, let's just say 3 more variants of this come back, and it's obvious that the signals are we have to map all the kids. I don't think anybody wants to do that. The only way for that to be happening is if the health department issues the order?
No, I guess, again, it depends on what that legal case is still active, right? It is still being work through, right? The only thing that was ruled on, obviously, was the TRO that's in place currently. So I guess part of the answer is there probably is still a final chapter to be told, right, in that circumstance. What I'm telling you is that I understand if in fact masking is viewed as a form of modified quarantine, that's the correct legal opinion, we would have to design a process that adhered to that requirement. If you were to do it at the local level, you would have to make sure that you designed a process that fully complied with all of those statutory requirements.
So even if we left this on the books, if we just suspended it, we still would have to come back and design that process?
I believe you would if you wanted to have a legally defensible process or policy, yes.
And that would take I would imagine that would take quite a while.
Not necessarily. I guess, again, depends on the circumstance. I don't want to overcomplicate this in nuance. I guess what I'm recommending is that you remove this policy from your manual, which would mean that the board would have to act to bring it back, and I would assume if the board at any point in the future were to act to bring it back, you would want all those questions answered that you're asking right now. I can't predict exactly what those answers are going to be at that point in time. I hope that it's not something that we have to navigate through, but I guess I'm just saying to you, my assumption would be you certainly want to be comfortable with the answers to all of those, thus the reason I would assume as a board you would want to act on that policy moving forward so that you could assure, if that were the recommendation, that all those answers were provided.
So I guess, I didn't mean to interrupt, but just to shed one opinion on it. I'm okay with the word remove, or the recommendation. Whatever the signals are, this is not designed as 3 data points are going to trigger something. They're signals that, it's not going to be a light switch, right? There's going to be dialogue, there's going to be conversation, there's going to be engagement with outside groups, if it ever comes to play. So I don't think it's going to be like 7 days. I think there's a little more time that elapses for that engagement, for checking with the different departments, for getting a legal opinion, all those things that we need answers to. So I don't view it as a light switch thing, therefore I'm okay with removing it. I hear your point about what's that time frame, but I don't think that time frame is going to conflict with our process.
It just seems, I don't know what the definition of suspend is, but it seems like suspend gives us more flexibility and agility, whereas removal doesn't.
Yeah. I would just want to talk, I would want to engage with all those parties regardless of suspend or remove. So to me, that runway is long.
But isn't the case is still active, correct? There's still an appeal to the Supreme Court, or did that go away? I'm sorry, I have not read any news on that in the last day or two.
Again,
So if something
the only development in the court case is the TRO. The court case itself has not been decided, right? Only a TRO was issued, right, relative to that of course obviously is impactful in the immediate. So yeah, I guess to the point, I think if you're trying to predict what set of circumstances might be in play at the point in time that perhaps you're considering a future decision, I think it would be very difficult to do right now. I think, Brad, to the core of your question, whether you remove the policy from your manual or suspend it right now, it would still take the same action from the board to bring it back. I don't think either would give you any more expedited path to work moving forward, because it would still take action from the board, and in order to take action from the board, I would assume you would want all of this information analyzed and answered for you. I think it's the same potential path in terms of timing.
So correct me if I'm wrong, we did not take 30 days to post it and that to do the first policy. So if we had an emergency situation, we can do something. I mean, I think the emergency situation is we can't keep our schools open. I mean, that's what, I think it's the staffing, it's the unable to keep our doors open would be what would trigger bringing something, another mitigation into the fold again.
You came together in an emergency meeting to make the decision you made a couple of weeks ago. So you have that capacity as a board.
Anything else, Mr. Paulson? No?
I understand, I have the same concern that you do. I understand it, that if, I guess my question, like, if we see another situation that we did at the beginning of January, would that be cause for us to come back together? If we can't staff, or, if we're having staffing issues, if we have hundreds and hundreds of kids out.
Sure. Yeah, I think you could. I think maybe to Rob's point, the likelihood of that like amping up within a matter of a couple of days is, you're going to see signals that it's coming, right?
Yeah.
Meaning, I think you will have ample time if you needed to as a board to respond.
Including engagement with outside
Right.
groups, which we definitely want.
Because each variant has had very different, parts to it that have required some different forms of mitigations. And, even the changing of the kind of mask with Omicron was for, a stronger mask, a more professional mask than before. So we can't predict what another variant mitigation need is going to be right at this time. And that's where I think we have to kind of look at what's happening out there, listen to what people are saying, as they're learning about each variant. So if we're requiring, like your recommendation is remove it out of our packet, whether that's suspend tells me we're leaving it in there or just putting it off to the side. So if you really want us to remove, I suggest we change that language to remove.
Yeah.
And then if we need to put another mitigation in place, we put that mitigation in place when we know what the variables are that we need to be looking at the time.
And I think, this policy is, the foundation of the policy was the guidance from ISBA and IDPH, which doesn't exist today. And who knows, we're just guessing that that's going to be the case anyway. So if we do have to come up with something, it's probably this would have to change anyway, right? Because the circumstances that got us here, I don't know, but it seems unlikely that the same circumstances are going to repeat.
I have a question. So I'm a little curious why it's only the face coverings that was put as a mitigation through policy. Like, why were the other mitigations permitted without policy? Like, do we need to have a policy to put a mitigation in place? Does that make sense? Or I guess
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
know
I
the history
understand
of
the
coming
question.
to-
Are you asking my opinion or thought around that?
Well, I guess since I wasn't here back in
Yeah.
that time when the policy was enacted, like, why was it only face coverings that was chosen to be put in policy?
Yeah, I think fair question, right? One, especially when we were looking at face coverings, I think that was the element of the mitigation plan where there was also a need to make sure that there was the ability to have some enforcement around it. Like how we organize kids in a classroom, that's something we do in lots of different configurations every school year and across every classroom, right? There isn't really a board policy that says it is okay to have, or you should have kids 2, 3, 4, or 5 feet right apart in classrooms, right? That's I think just an organizational structure to how we've operated it. So the face covering really was the one kind of universal mitigation where on an individual student level, there was a need to ensure that we had the ability to enforce that expectation for students.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Blattner, do you have any other?
I just had a couple quick questions. As a result of some things that have come to me and hearing, it kind of triggered a question. So if we have students who have symptoms, a symptom, headache, who are unable to test, either because of cost or transportation, so they choose to stay out for 5 days, but then they're assumed to return as though they had COVID, and we're requiring them to mask for that remaining days 6 to 10. Is that something that we can do now that we're talking about whether or not we can ask students to mask or not? Or does that fall under something Like how does that?
Yeah, yes, you can do it because the isolation window otherwise would be 10 days, right? So the language in terms of the isolation window, it is conditionally reduced to 5 days upon an assumption of day 6 through 10. But if a student's not able to do that, there is the option of a 10-day isolation window.
Okay, I think it's some of what I've heard is difficult. You know, a student who had a toothache went to the dentist and isn't allowed back until they have a test, and not able to get that, so staying out of school for 5 days. Leading to my question, when that happens, whether it's a situation like that, which seems, I don't know, maybe unreasonable if it's a toothache and not a COVID symptom, or a COVID positive student, is there still a remote learning component at home or like some support at home? Okay.
Yeah, the students that are isolated are still have the ability to receive the remote learning supports.
Okay.
And I guess the last piece that I would mention, like I think some of the other accommodations we've talked about, I think you've heard us talk a couple of times about testing supports and capacity in the district. By all means, if there's a family that is struggling to find a place to get a test, we can help families with that.
I think sometimes it's more transportation and being able to access that.
Again, we have resources to help with that. So we have some testing capacity inside of the district. I would just say to any family that is struggling with that, reach out and ask for help if that's the case, and we'd be happy to help families.
Okay, that's good to know. Yep. The only other thing I had, the very last slide, when the recommendation to officially remove the universal mitigations, quarantine, universal masking, and the test to stay requirement for in-school close contacts. What about the teacher requirement to test or vaccinate? Is that also removed?
That we are not doing that either. So because that was vacated as part of that TRO, we're not doing that either.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I just have just a couple, and Mrs. Booten, you said it so eloquently before, this is fluid, and we have to remain fluid, and we don't know necessarily what's around the corner, but what we do know is that, when this first hit in 2020, a lot has changed. And we have to, I look at in this PowerPoint where it even said changes to circumstances and data. We continue to move forward with whether it's vaccinations and therapeutics and people with natural immunity and all these different things, to keep the same set of mitigations 2 years down the road that we had before. When things keep changing, we have to change as well. And so I think that these, as we're looking, I went back and I did some reading myself, even just within the DuPage County Health Department, and, it was talking about when you're removing layers of mitigations, you should give yourselves 2 to 4 weeks. And so we're at that 2.5 week point right now where you're looking at your current data. And so we're looking at our current data right now, as we're looking to do some more future changes in that. I think we just keep focusing on, too, what is happening within our schools and what can we manage. And, as I went back before and I said, there's a lot of, there's a lot of unknowns out there. I think our biggest one is, what do we need to do to keep our doors open? If we start to see things that are changing, we need to ask for the help of what do we need to do for those changes. And every variant could have different things that need possibly to be able to be done. So I'm good with the plan that we have. I was appreciative that you reached out and you shared this plan with the DuPage County Health Department so that they see what we're doing as well. But I'm ready to go ahead and take the vote on the masks. So can I have a motion and a second to, are we using remove? Remove the rules and adjourn, oh no, I'm sorry, on the wrong thing. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the removal of Board Policy 4.182, face coverings as presented.
Yes, so moved.
Moved by Mr. Hanlon,
Second.
second by Mr. Long. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 No.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Next, we have suspend the rules and adjourn to workshop setting. Can I have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and adjourn to workshop setting?
Move.
Moved by Mr. Hanlon,
Second.
second by Mr. Paulson. I don't know who said it first. Mrs. Hutchinson, can you call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay, our social emotional learning feature. Dr. Salagi, I see you're up there.
Yeah, so I'm going to hand it right over. We've met with the board's Social Emotional Learning Committee several times through the year to review kind of key pieces of data and information as we've monitored the SEL plan. And I asked Dr. Salagi just to come back and kind of re-anchor the board in kind of the big picture focus areas for this year, so that you have a reminder of what we are specifically focusing on within SEL and have a chance to at least get an update and answer any questions. So, Dr. Salagi?
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. Thank you, Board of Education, for the opportunity to give you our social emotional learning feature this evening. As Dr. Schuler alluded to, I don't suspect that any of this information will be new for you, but I think it is really important that we do bring you back and our community back and anchor you in some of the key systematic actions that we're taking as a whole system this year. So this does not encompass the full social emotional learning work plan for our department this year, but there are certainly kind of 5 bigger actions when we think about the emotional well-being of our students. So first and foremost, and we wanted to get it all on one page for you as well. First and foremost, I think the first layer in one of our key strategies is that we've initiated trusted adult relationship mapping across the district at all of our K-12 schools. This is anchored in the belief that all of our students should have a trusted adult. We know the research is really clear that when kids are connected to school through a trusted adult, learning increases and our emotional stressors decrease. But I would also want to make really clear, just as we had a conversation around layers of support, a good social emotional learning plan also comes with layers, right? So that's, as we roll this out and talk about our actions, they're designed to support students in layers. One of the other actions that we've taken this year is to expand our club and activity offerings across our entire system. So this has happened at the elementary, middle, and high school level. This is an action that actually supports the research in the connected adult piece and gets kids connected to school. One thing that I do want to make really clear to the Board of Education tonight too as well, in the springtime when I typically do the full social emotional learning update, in each of these areas, we actually have assessments and data that back these pieces that we monitor and we look at closely to make decisions and support programming. I'll be bringing that more conclusively to you in the spring as well. We share that incrementally with the board committee, and as Dr. Schuler alluded to, we met yesterday evening. We were able to go over some of those assessment pieces that back this programming as well. A third systematic action that we're doing this year in grades 8, 9, 11, and 12, you'll see I have it listed here as Acknowledge, Care, and Tell. That is actually the ACT acronym around our signs of suicide prevention programming that all of our students are partaking in throughout this year. Certainly this is a research-based youth suicide prevention program. Not only is there education as part of this, so you're trying to create a culture of really where students are able to acknowledge warning signs in themselves or in peers, and take a caring approach and make sure that they tell a trusted adult. So certainly we want that acronym to become a part of our culture, but I want to make it clear too that paired with that program, there's actually a screening as well. And we have teams that come to a building, there's a research-based screening that goes with it, and then we have a response process to respond and help students if needed, if students are internalizing. A fourth piece, and I know the Board of Education has heard about this, over the past 2 years, and then most recently this year, we added emotional wellness coordinators at our middle school. This is the second year for emotional wellness coordinators at our high school. This was a new position that came with a programming philosophy. These folks not only have their own space to respond and support students that may be in short-term or long-term social, emotional, or mental health crisis. So that space is a part of the program, but those folks' primary responsibility is also transitioning our students back to school in hospitalization situations, and also out of school when support is needed. They become the primary point person to support our students and families in that area. And then lastly, anytime when you are implementing new programming or always attempting to grow and get better, behind all of that is always learning. And so this year we're offering a focused professional learning opportunity at all of our schools, K-12, that all of our staff will receive. And it is really focused around really 4 components: that proactive approach of student-teacher relationships, and then the proactive approach of how you manage your classroom, everything from how you respond and set clear expectations to how you set up physical arrangements and proactively set up situations in the classroom that are predictable for students so that they're open and available to learn. The training then goes into portions of how you prevent a crisis, how you prevent escalation. This is some work that Dr. Kyle and I have partnered on as we've looked at discipline data and other pieces. We know that if we can prevent escalation in the classroom as well, we can prevent situations where kids are out of school and keep kids in school and keep them learning. And the last portion of that is really making sure that in any situation that does rise to a crisis or a significant piece, that there's a restorative piece, and we're starting that baseline work with our staff this year as well. And really that professional learning piece is, in my mind, a complement to the talents of our staff that are already doing great work with our kids. And yesterday afternoon, had an opportunity again to take the Board of Education Social Emotional Learning team through that presentation. That's been developed by our behavioral specialists. It's being launched at all of our buildings in collaboration with teachers, specialists, and administration at the building, so that it's still specific to the demographic at each school and the population at each school and the needs of the staff and the students. So again, in summary, that's 5 kind of big picture systematic actions, not encompassing the entire plan, but I think really important to note some of the bigger picture pieces that we have in place to support the needs of our kids. Take any questions at this time.
Hey, Chris, I like the focused professional learning topic. I hadn't really considered it a whole lot, frankly, so I appreciate you bringing it up. How does that manifest itself in our micro-credentialing? Do we have specific programs or units, I guess I would call them, in micro-credentialing that are tangential to this topic?
We do. Yeah, actually, I would say in each one of those areas, relationships, behavior management, crisis prevention, restorative practices, there's micro-credentials available for staff to take on. Specific to this is a actual opportunity that we have created internally that is structured, that every staff member will receive throughout the year. We've got a schedule that they're receiving it on. So this is a mandatory piece that folks are engaging in. The micro-credentials would be an opportunity that we've researched, found, and said, hey, this is an opportunity available.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments for Dr. Sloggy?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this back. I think this is an important issue, as Susan, I think you put in your comments about keeping our eye on the ball, remembering the real cause of the mental health crisis is not the masks. And so I appreciate that. While that's been a factor, this has been an issue for a long period of time. In a future presentation, I think it would be helpful to bring to the board kind of the full scope of supports that are offered to kids, not just the emotional wellness coordinators, but the counselors, social workers, school psychologists. Try to bring us some deeper explanation of how that team works together to support kids. I think that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Thank you. There was a video that you shared in the SEL committee meeting yesterday, and I was just wondering if you can send the link to all of us through email.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely.
Other questions or comments?
Chris, I was going to ask back to the learning piece. Can you just comment on kind of the foundation for why the focus on behavior, right? Why student behavior became the focus of professional learning? I think there were some things that we saw at the front end of this year with students returning in addition to some of the discipline disproportionality. But
Yeah, absolutely. Really two pieces, and I'll expand on those a bit. Certainly we have and have had students coming back to us from all different situations, right? Even if you think about how learning was optionalized last year, you had students in different situations, at home, in school, different models, students experiencing different home environments as well. Some of our students never being in school if they were younger, students making different transition points. So certainly at the beginning of this school year, I think that we did see just an increase in behaviors as an output to various stressors. Those stressors being wide and varied, but certainly then you saw that manifesting in behaviors in classrooms early on in the school year. I think we're at a much better point this year with classroom behavior at this point in the year, but certainly we saw that at the early point of the year. So certainly that was one piece. We have continued also to monitor behaviors of our students as they're coming in at the youngest ages, right? We continue to see behaviors manifesting, so I think this is a proactive step in that. But then the third piece would be Dr. Kyle's been working with Discipline Disproportionality Committee, certainly looking at what has been the root cause or some of the reasons behind some of our more significant behavioral issues. And out of that committee work, really a recommendation was we have to work to de-escalate and crisis prevent. But the folks that are in Dr. Kyle's team are also folks that work closely with me as well. And they said the first step is we also need to make sure we're integrating all of our proactive social emotional learning strategies. Things like how do you connect with students? How do you set up your classroom? How do you do all these pieces? And that's kind of how all of this opportunity came to fruition.
Dr. Yeboah?
Just a quick one. I recall, was it the ESSER funds that helped funded the expanded clubs and activities, and is there a plan to make sure they remain in place? I think we talked about that before.
Yeah, certainly I want to be able to bring some information to the Board of Education this spring. We're hearing really positive feedback at all levels around the expansion of that. Certainly I've heard our principals talk at the elementary level how this new opportunity or opportunities are connecting our kids, creating a climate of a whole new student experience in the classroom. I've heard at the secondary level how it's helped to establish some programs, and long-term will hopefully continue plug clubs and programs instead of having one and done. So we're hearing really good things, but certainly we want to be able to bring information to sustain that, and I hope to further report on that this spring as well.
just as a reminder, any position that we added as a result of ESSER funds, we did with a 3-year commitment, right? So it doesn't mean we have to keep it for 3 years. If through the evaluation we were to determine something is not received, kind of getting the desired outcome, we could stop it early. But we didn't do anything with the idea that it was just one and done. So we have a couple years to plan that transition.
Yeah. Okay. Just a quick comment mostly on the focused professional learning. I think one of the strengths of this district is the integrated approach with SEL and equity and proactive practices. And I think there's many ways in which this professional learning is articulated that doesn't make explicit some of the good work that's being done in preparing teachers in, for example, culturally responsive teaching and leading and things like that. You've named some of them, but student-teacher relationships, behavior, prevention, de-escalation, and even restorative conversations are all directly linked to some of these ideas around equity, and I think making them more clear would just help sustain that good work and make it more systematic and built in. We know that our teaching force is very white, and we know that while good work is being done, those intentional efforts will help, we know, solve some of the problems on the front end, and then, not have as many to deal with later. So I would like to see, if possible, more of where those links are being made, because I know they're being made. So if we can integrate them in some of that language. I think it says it's also a proactive step as we work with students in a wide range of social, emotional, and behavioral needs. There's a direction that we can also look at preparing teachers to create learning environments that are conducive to all children as well. So not just looking at the needs of the kids, but looking at the learning environment that's conducive, which, again, I know it's being done, but I would love to see it articulated more explicitly.
Other questions or comments for Dr. Sloggy? I have just one. Is there any specific level? Professionally, I work with a lot of middle schools, and I know that middle schools and other districts have really had a challenge where maybe students weren't there for 6th grade, they missed their last quarter of 5th grade, weren't there for 6th grade, they're coming into 7th grade, and this is a whole new, this year has been a whole new world, and where they've seen a lot of challenges at the middle school level. Is there a specific level within our district, or does each level have its own unique challenges for behaviors that you're seeing this year?
I think my first thought, or my first response to that is each unique level has their own unique challenges, or some of the same challenges, but I also know that our schools at those transition points, particularly 7th grade and 10th grade, have focused particularly on those groups proactively. To reach out, to be proactive on the front end. I would also, from a discipline standpoint, Dr. Kyle, are you seeing anything within those different grade levels? I am not hearing specifically from those grade levels that there's a specific grade level.
I think, and I shared it at one of the subcommittees, that definitely when students came back, and Dr. Schuler and Dr. Sloggy have shared, some of our students have not come in as 9th graders or 6th graders at those transition points. So we do know at all levels, we've seen an increase of the disciplinary events that have happened. It's getting better, but we did see, obviously, last year we had 0 to no discipline. So students come back. Part of the training that Dr. Sloggy and I are working on is helping this, but we also know that students, the pandemic did affect students. It affected them in ways, like Dr. Sloggy said, 7th grade transition as well as 10th. We have students that come in that needed to learn how to walk the buildings. How do you act as a freshman in high school or a 6th grader? So I do know at middle school and high school, we have focused efforts on trying to get students acclimated back to school, which sounds really basic, but it's one of the things that we've worked on this year.
Thank you.
Hey, one thing I just want to add with that, just a personal point of concern that I think we've got to keep an eye on is, so if you think about all the work that was done over the previous couple of years in the early childhood space, right? We have a whole early learning collaborative that was focused on the kinds of experiences that are important to provide to kids to have them ready for the school experience, both academically, socially, and all of that. I think a lot of that disappeared in the early stages of the pandemic. I think young kids didn't have some of the experiences that I do think are really important to kind of giving them foundational kind of preparedness. So just in my view, in answering that, well, I don't know that you'll necessarily see it manifest in one behavior. I do think we're going to have to double down on, those really early learning indicators, kids transition to kindergarten and the early years, because I think there may be some elements that are missing that we've got to help to fill for them.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Sloggy? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, there being no further action to come before the board in open session, I ask for a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Paulson,
Second.
second by Mr. Hanlon. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting is adjourned.